This is a clip from the Canon podcast. To hear the full episode and get access to exclusive benefits, head over to patreon.com/thecanonpod and sign up for just £3 a month.
The reports are saying, though, £200 million to spend this summer. Now, if we get Rice in there, and that is, let's just say, 90 to £100 million spent, you're going to have 100 left there. But of course, player sales comes into it. You might have the likes of Kieran Tierney leaving. You've got reports of Will Smith-Rowe, Fowler Balogun. There's so many players that could leave Arsenal as well. How would you then spend? Who would you then sign next is the question I'd say. Is it a wide forward? Is it a player for Brighton? You know, Moses Caicedo? Is it a right back, a left back, a centre back? Who would you sign after Declan Rice if we get over the line?
I mean, I think that you need two marquees ultimately in the window. And I've always said this. And I think there's three major holes in this Arsenal squad that I want solved by 2024. That's my goal. I want a marquee forward. I do believe that Mikel deserves a marquee killer forward. Whether or not that's available this summer, I don't know. I think Declan Rice, I'm going to assume, is done for the purposes of this conversation. And then like the answer is kind of like, what else?
We need to
what
slow
else
down.
is
We need to start. We've been here before with my Callum Woodruff. We can't do this again. We need to learn as fans.
Listen, I'm delusional from 3 years ago, but let's say that you've addressed kind of a midfield
George has lost all
signing.
composure at this point.
Yeah, let's say that
Staring
you've
at his Rice
addressed
poster.
that. Yeah,
His mind's now.
But let's say, like, what else do you need in addition to that? I do think that the midfield, even if you were to get Rice, isn't complete for me. Like, I do think that the midfield would need another body in there for me to feel comfortable. And we were talking about this off air. Listen, with Granit Xhaka leaving, and let's say Rice is the replacement, or you can insert whatever name that you like if you think that Rice isn't it. It doesn't solve the problem that we've had for the last 3 seasons in terms of the depth of that position. So you might be replacing the starting quality, but then you're not replacing the depth. So for me, there is another midfield addition that needs to go through. And yes, I mean, there's a very reliable report from the Times in terms of Gary Jacob that's talking about a Rice and Caicedo. It's not just him, it's Alex Crook as well. There's not just one or two links. There's many links that are saying Rice and Caicedo. Now, if you're asking me, George, do you think that's the way to go? Listen, I feel that securing transitions is the biggest thing that Arsenal will need in the future and in the Champions League. And I think that gives you the platform to then express your talents up the field. And so when I'm looking at it, I'm always going to choose the options that have a midfield overhaul and securing our kind of press, because I think that has been the key to Arsenal's success this season. So if I'm looking at it, I'm looking at midfield as a major area of kind of reform, let's say. And I'm happy to kind of leave the forward marquee signing to kind of the next year or whatever, because I don't see the pool of forwards right now that I absolutely love. I don't see the pool of maybe even midfielders that I absolutely love. There's a couple names that we've been linked to. Mason Mount, interesting one. Caicedo, Declan Rice. These are all very interesting names, but the one thing I will say, the pool becomes a lot smaller when you're not competing for the Kiwiors and you're not competing for kind of, you know, the Aaron Ramsdales of the windows, right? Like when you're competing with these Declan Rices and the Moises Caicedo, 5 to 6 clubs want them, and there's only 3 or 4 of these players that are going to go around. And I think maybe the only thing that I'm happy about is all these links that say that we have 200 million, they say that we're aggressive and we're ready to spend it, and we're ready to spend it now. I would look towards midfield. I love the Ricedo dream. I think it would do unbelievable things to have that. I think it sends a stupidly good message to the global perception of Arsenal, but also it's our roots, guys. When you start to look at the Invincibles, and I really go back, that's my favorite team for no shocking reason, but when you look at it, what is the success and the bedrock of that team? It was physical monsters and beasts. And by the way, look at Mikel Arteta's quotes. They all talk about physical intensity as the big thing that he needs to address in the summer window. And I agree with him. I think for me, midfield is kind of what I'm looking at, as well as a defensive option, whether that's a right back or a right center back option. I do think we need one more defensive addition to just give us that flexibility that we don't experience a kind of a Saliba effect again. Or you can just get Rice and have him at center back.
Yeah, and even Caicedo could play right back as well, so that's a possibility that you can play him there as well. And I think the thing is, though, we've also been linked to forwards, though, and the one that stands out right now is Moussa Diaby. of Bayer Leverkusen. Now, of course, with Xhaka going there potentially, that could open up an avenue there for Arsenal to have an opportunity to go and sign a left-footed right winger, very explosive. I'd say a slightly bit different to Bukayo Saka in the sense that he has got the more explosive pace to burst past players, and he could be a very good rotational option. Now, with Reece Nelson leaving as well, I think Arsenal will need to sign a forward at that stage. And the question I have is, if we do spend 100 on Rice and maybe 80 on Caicedo, that's nearly 100. That's 180 gone there and there. So depending on who else leaves Arsenal, we need to be a bit careful if we do sign two midfielders. Is that enough for us to maybe go and win a title next season, or is there still other areas to address? Go on, Alex.
Yeah, it's really hard because I think there's certain things that are not dependent, and then there's certain things that are dependent. I think the two places in the squad that are not dependent is we need +1 in midfield. I think that's no doubt, and it's a DM left 8, and it's probably, ideally Declan Rice, right? I think then the other place in the squad that is not dependent is probably a defender, probably a right-sided defender who can cover both the centre-back slot and the right-back slot. I think that's probably not dependent. That doesn't necessarily make it the highest priority, but I don't think that's dependent on anyone going. From there, I just actually wrote it out while you guys were speaking. There's a number of question marks. The 4 question marks I have are Trossard, Tierney, Jorginho, and Nelson. Nelson looks like he possibly might be going, but I really like the look of him at the moment. And, if we've spent big in other areas, I wouldn't mind Nelson for another season, just +1. Jorginho, kind of depends, see what we do in midfield. Again, depends what happens. Tierney, the left-back slot is an interesting one, because if Tierney goes, do we need a Zinchenko analogue who can do that role, or do we want a different style? Is Kivior enough? Do we need a more sort of attacking fullback to replace Tierney? That's a big question. And then finally, Trossard in the forward areas. I like Trossard. Just the more I look at him, the more I see an interior, and I see a false 9. I don't see a left winger. So I'm then looking at the wide areas, and I'm thinking that is very thin. If we don't have Trossard there, we have basically Martinelli and Saka. So I want someone who can come in. I think that's probably what the plan was with Mudryk. I want someone who can come in and play both sides as big money spend. I want a midfield big money spend. But again, that forward signing depends on what happens. So it's a lot of it. The centre backy right back doesn't depend. I don't think. I think we'll get that in, and the midfielder doesn't. From there, it's really difficult to say. And I think it depends on incomings and outgoings and how the squad shapes up. Thanks for checking out the Canon podcast. To get full episodes and access to exclusive benefits, head over to patreon.com/thecannonpod and sign up for just £3 a month.